Hello, Keith Rucker at VintageMachinery.org. So today we're going to start tearing down the lathe here for doing a restoration, cleanup, whatever you want to call on it. We're just going to start tearing into this thing. But before I do, let me mention, anytime you start on a project like this, I know this is probably obvious to many of you, but it may not be obvious to everybody. Take a few minutes, get out a little digital camera, get your phone out, whatever, and take about a gazillion pictures of this machine fully assembled. Take it from every imaginable angle that you can get to. When you think you've taken enough pictures, get down on your hands and knees, crawl around your belly, take some pictures from the bottom looking up, whatever. I promise you, you'll be glad that you did when you go to put this thing back together, because you're going to get there and you say, where does this go? Or exactly how did this come apart? You'll think you'll remember, but trust me, you won't. And if some of your restorations turn into some of mine, instead of being done over the course of a few days, some of these restorations can be stretched over weeks, months, and sometimes even years. And trying to remember how you took something apart 6 months ago isn't always easy. So document everything as you're taking it apart. Take pictures. Trust me, you'll be glad that you did. I can't tell you how many times pictures have saved my tail when I went to put something back together. So I think what we'll do is go ahead and just start taking pieces off. We'll start with the tailstock down here. This is kind of heavy. I don't know if I can pick this up by myself. I'm going to try. Let me see if I can see if this will just come out first. This needs to be cleaned up anyway. There we go. I really need an extra person here to help me with this. Tell you what, I think for now we're just going to go down with it. All right, I think I'm going to start. We'll just take, this little cover is not original. I imagine there was probably a cast iron cover that went over this at one time. I may have to make or find something for that. So this is a taper attachment. Go ahead and just pull this little plate off here. All right, so the compound here, there's a couple of bolts up underneath it that tighten it down, allows you to spin it. And I think what we'll do is we'll just go ahead and loosen those all the way up. There we go. So those two little bolts fit in there, and there's a couple of square head bolts that fit down the slot that those fit into. Let's take this over. Looks like there's 3 bolts holding this taper attachment on. I've already got or 6 bolts, but anyway, I've already got 5 of them taken apart, and I'm trying to see if I can get the rest of it out here. I think it's just hung up on a bolt. There it goes. All right, let me finish taking this bolt out back here, and I think it'll come right off. All right, I'm pulling it out. I'm seeing that this screw goes all the way through this, and there's a bracket back here. I think what we need to do is take this bracket off so that the screw will be separate. So I'm gonna go ahead and take these off. All right, I went off camera there for a few minutes while I kind of worked on figuring this thing out. So I think I've got it now. So first thing I did was we removed the gib that goes in here. So this is a tapered gib that you can tighten up. There's a little screw here that comes in the front, and by tightening or loosening this, this wedges in here up against the dovetails and tightens up any slop or loosens it up if it's a little bit tight. I've also got all my bolts out of the end of the taper attachment here, and I think what we can do now is just literally pull this thing out. Well, maybe not. So there is a nut down in here. This cross-side screw connects to the compound, and we're going to have to take that apart. I think that's what this little section right here is. So let me work on that. Yeah, we're figuring this out as we go. So on the end of this, there was two little lock nuts. I took those off, and there's a thrust bearing, and once that's all off, this will slide off. So let me go take this over out of the way. So guys, I had a little dilemma yesterday as I was working on this. I'm trying to figure out how to get the cross slide off of this. And the problem is you got the screw that goes through here. Of course, you turn on the front here, and that adjusted in and out. And then out here on the back side, you've got, you know, some thrust bearings, whatever. This stuff would come off, but there's not really a way for the screw to go out that way. There's no way for this to come up unless the screw comes out first. And with the handle up here, you know, I'm like, okay, well, how do I disconnect the screw to get it out? Well, it just wasn't coming to me. And I'm like, well, I guess I need to, right here is where the nut is that attaches to the screw. And I said, well, if I knock the nut out, I ought to be able to pull it off. But then I got looking at it, the way the nut is in here, it goes on the screw. I said, that just doesn't look like it's meant to come out like that very easily. So I left it. Actually, I went to town. I met my daughter for supper last night. She's working as a camp counselor this summer and was home. We hadn't seen her in a couple of weeks. And on my way home, I'm sitting here thinking about it. And I remembered when I pulled on this one time, boom. This is actually just fitting up inside of a sleeve. There's a key in there. And now I can turn this a little bit, and voila, the screw just comes right out the back. So, you know, just keep in mind when you're trying to take something apart like this, if you get to some place where it's not easy, they have to put these machines together. And they go together fairly easily in most cases. And if something's captured and you can't get it out, you know, think about it. Just stop. Don't go get a bigger hammer. Don't start tearing something up. Just stop and think about it. You know, I stopped, and all my mind was thinking about for the next couple of hours, and then all of a sudden it was just ding, 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 ding. Why didn't you try that? And sure enough, it worked. So anyway, that's out, and now this. All right, there's still got to figure out how to get that over the ways. There's another adjustment back here for the gib screw. I'm sure I can loosen that up, and then this should pull right up. So let me get a screwdriver to adjust that out. Actually, I think I can do it with my hand. All right, we're going off camera. I'll figure it out and bring it back. Well, after studying this for a little while, I do have a parts manual, for this machine that I can look at and kind of get an idea of how this is all put together. And the nut is basically a bronze piece. It looks like it's just kind of pressed up into this hole. And there's two little set screws on there, one on each side, that are drilled across both the nut and the casting, and that's what holds it in place. So I'm going to pull these out, and the nut should just press down now. Let me get a punch and we'll see if we can punch that out. I want to make sure that that nut is over. There's a hole in the bottom of the casting here that'll go down through. And this is just a piece of brass or copper, I'm not sure which. And I'm going to use it as a punch. Yeah, it moved. And there it is. That's the bronze nut, brass nut, whatever you want to call it. The threads look good. The screw is actually pretty tight on this, guys, so you know, that's real good. So anyway, that's out now, and this should just come, slide right off or come up, whatever. So there we go. And looks good. Casting looks to be in good shape. The you know, just a quick inspection here. I don't see anything jumping out. Looks bad. So now I'm going to start working on disassembling the front of the apron and getting all this apart. And the first thing I'm going to do is take the thread dial off, and it should be just one nut here holding it in place. Teeth on the gear look all right. It looks like it's a little tight. No, it's turning. So I think that'll all clean up pretty easily. Good deal. Next step here is I want to pull the saddle off of the carriage. And to do that, there's a couple of things I want to do to get ready. Number one, I've already got some cribbing up underneath the apron here, and that's just that once I take the top off, there's not going to be anything holding it up, and I don't want all the weight to be on the screws and stuff behind it. So I don't know if you can see it or not, but up underneath there's some 2x4s and some cribbing, so that will hold that on there. I've looked at my parts diagram. There's really nothing much, it doesn't appear to be anyway, anything connecting the top to the bottom as far as linkages, except for this one handle here. This is, of course, the handle that engages the spindle, and it goes down to a bracket. And I've disconnected, there was just a pin in there, and I've disconnected that, so that should come up. Now, the next steps here are, there are 4 places on here where there is basically a clamp that rides on the bottom of the ways that keeps it from bouncing up and going side by side. And there's 2 bolts, and then there's 2 screws here on each one that hold that in place. I need to take all those off so that it will pick up, and then we'll come in here and undo these 3 screws right here, which is what actually connects the saddle to the front of the apron. And then with any luck, the saddle will come straight up. So I'm going to get in here, probably do it off camera. First off, we're going to take off all these clamps, and it's just going to be crawling around down there. You won't be able to see anything anyway. And I'll probably bring you back when we take these out. So to kind of show you what I did here, this is the little clamping block that goes on the bottom, and basically there's 2 bolts, and it just hooks on the bottom of that and rides back and forth. And again, that just prevents the carriage from coming up. I thought these screws were tied in there as well, but there's actually another gib in here that rides on this front face, and you can adjust between the front and the back. There's some adjustments that you can tighten that up, squeeze it up, and adjust out any movement going in that direction. And we may be able, we had a little bit of movement as we were working with this earlier on with the indicator. We may be able to actually adjust a lot of that out using some of these adjustments. So now let's take these bolts out. And so we've got a hex head or a hex wrench here, and I'm just got a little cheater bar I'm going to put on here, and we'll unscrew these. There's one. And three. All right, it was nothing to it. I just was able to take my screwdriver and pry that apart. And this, again, I need another person out here, don't I? That or a gantry crane. So it's always fun to see how things work. I love to look at this engineering on these old machines and be able to just kind of see how they made things, work back then. So a couple interesting things in here. Number one, there's a little hand pump down here that pumps oil up into the gears and stuff. So there's oil down in the bottom of this, and as the gears are spinning, it's picking it up. But there's other oil points in here that needs to be oiled. So if you just pump this little pump right here, a little hand pump down here, and watch what happens. It's pumping oil up into this groove. And of course that's sealed off at the top. And there's holes, there's a hole here, there's a hole here, there's a little alley that comes over here, it comes in, and it just basically distributes oil down to the bearing points. This one here actually goes to a little tube, and it goes down to the half nut that engages onto the threading rod, the power for threading. So just interesting how they did that, and also looking at how they did the gearing in here. So of course when you turn the hand wheel, that turns a rack and pinion up here that moves it back and forth, and normally it's just engaged where you can do it by hand. But inside of this little spur gear down here, there's actually a shaft that goes in, and it connects to the feed rod. So there's, you got the threaded one here is for threading, and the other one is for your just straight feeds. So it's picking up power off of that, and it's always spinning in there. And it's basically spinning a piece in here. So if you look, there's this gear right here. So this gear here this center gear right here is going to be pretty much spinning all the time. And when you engage the feed, it moves that gear in, it meshes with this gear behind it, and now you're locked into your feed, and so that's actually going to move the carriage back and forth. And then if we go down here to the other direction and engage into this one, this spur gear here, or gear here, is going to go up to a smaller spur gear into the cross feed, and that's what's going to feed the screw going in the other way. So just really simple. It just goes between the two sides. Normally it stays in the center where it's disengaged, but that's how your feed mechanisms, how you engage and disengage both the cross slide and the carriage feeds, which I thought was interesting. Really can't see much else right now, but anyway, that's all there. So now we got to figure out how to get all that off, and that's going to take some studying. All right, so here's a fun little challenge I've run into, and I thought I'd share this with you guys. So I have about decided that the only way we're going to get this carriage off is it's going to have to come out and slide out over the ends of all these rods. And do that, we got to take this whole block off, which isn't a big deal. But there's this one bracket down here. This is actually the lever that reverses the feed mechanism. So there's a little handle on the carriage. It's not on there now, but we're going to put it back on there when we put it all back together. And basically this thing just turns, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a turn, maybe not even that much. Here, I'll activate it for you so you can see it. So that's pretty much all it does, is that right there. Well, it's got those two stop collars in there to limit the travel. And the stop collars are attached to this thing with tapered pins. Now, tapered pins can be really aggravating. They're usually not a problem to get out, though. If you find the small end, there's a big end and a small end. If you find the small end, you take a punch, and you just punch them right out. Problem is the way these are installed is they're going straight down through my rod, and I can't get a punch behind it. So I've been racking my brains on what to do. So what I'm going to try is to see if I can just put a set of vice grips on these things, real good and tight. And it's tight, but I see it wiggling. All right, look there. I think it's going to come right out. So there's that tapered pin, and now that should come off the end. Let's see here. All right, I'm going to put this pin back in here. These are all drilled, and through the piece. So this taper pin, if you look, it's not exactly on center, which is fine. It's through there. It's probably drilled by hand on the machine. So this one has got to go back on this one, and this one will have to go on that one. It probably won't line up on the other. So goodness gracious, got the dogs running around here and they're fighting each other. So let me see if I can get the other one out. All right, this other one's in a bit more tight of a spot. Let's see if we can get it to do the same thing though. All right, yeah, it's going to come out. There it comes. Let's take the rest of this off and see if this will come off. So there was one nut on the back here. This is for the threading lead screw, and there's got some adjustments in here where you can take the slack up in that one. So I've got the back nut off. There should be a little washer there. Well, I'll get that off in a minute. Let's go ahead and take these nuts off. All right, so now let me get some Allen wrenches here. Yeah. All right, guys, so what's going on is I thought these right here were actually studs coming out of the casting, but in fact, I'm not exactly sure. I think they're just alignment pins, and they're just free floating into the casting itself. So the bottom one came out, the top one stayed in the back. So what I'm going to do is drive it back out. I'll put the nut back on here, and hopefully that will allow it to pull out. And so I'm just using, again, my little brass punch here, a piece of rod where I won't hurt anything. There we go. And now we got to get this off. So I think now it just kind of drives off the end. So I'm going to take a block of wood here and a hammer. And that's off. So I think now that we got all this off the end, I'm going to try to roll that apron down. And I may have to wait to get some help to pick it up to get it off of here, but I'm going to at least try to get it down to the end. Let's see. My cribbing is causing more trouble than it's worth at the moment. So let me see if I can. All right. I've got somebody coming over later this afternoon, and I'll see if he'll give me a hand pulling it the rest of the way off. It's just a little too heavy for me to try to pick up by myself. We got all the components now of the carriage assembly, the saddle, the apron, the taper attachment, the cross slide, all of that has been disassembled, and it's pretty much sitting on the table over here now. So it's a lot of pieces, as you can tell, that we're going to have to go through here and work on each one. So some of these will probably get further disassembly when we get to cleaning them up and repainting them, but pretty much done. So pretty happy with this. I do want to bring you in over here and show you. I'm going to go ahead and remove some of the little tags off of this and show you my procedure that I'm using to remove the tags that are on here. To get this part cleaned up, get all the old paint removed and get it repainted, I want to remove these little machinery tags. So there was one up here, there's one here, there's a bunch on the machine. And these are always challenging because they're put on here using what's called a drive screw, which is just a little hardened pin. It usually has some, not really screw cuts, but kind of a twisted groove in it that you drill a hole and you drive these in with a hammer. And they're really not made to come out. Once you put them in, they're made to stay in. And getting these out without destroying the tag can be extremely difficult and frustrating sometimes. There's lots of tricks and different things you can do to get them out. And sometimes one method will work and sometimes a different method will work, just depending on the kind of drive screw that you have. So these, when I first started, I took a little Dremel and I cut a slot in it where I could put a screwdriver in, because I have been very successful in the past in just twisting them out like a screw. These, they just wouldn't do it for whatever reason. They're hardened, so they're difficult to drill. You can sometimes get a center punch on there and knock the heads off, but then you may end up with the pin down in the hole, and you have to get the pin out, which is also frustrating. So what I ended up doing on these is I just took a little chisel, a little cold chisel, and these happen to be really short. So if I come in here and just kind of wrap that on either side, and I'm trying to be careful not to mess up the tag. This one is hard to get to. There's just not good access to it. There we go. And it just kind of comes out. And you can see that little drive pin is pretty short, so it comes out pretty easily once I do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that on all of them. And you can see the tag I took off up here. This one said, notice do not reverse at high speeds. Up underneath it is black. And that is probably the original color of the machine. It's this machinery black. Don't know that I'm going to go back to that color. We'll see. And looks like on top of that there's a dark gray and then a light gray on top of that. So it looks like it's been painted several times over the years. Here we are on the lathe where we are right now with the carriage removed. You can see that it looks a lot different. Up next, probably in the next video, or we'll come in and remove all these drive rods down here. I want to get the machine tags off, get the handles off of this. We'll probably at least start going into the quick change gearbox. I don't know that I'll do a complete disassembly of that. It just depends on what it looks like. Probably not. Main thing is just getting it where we can get this old paint stripped off and get it cleaned up so we can do a new paint job on it. Mechanically, there's really nothing wrong with it, so I don't really have a need to tear into something unless it's just necessary to do so. So with that, we're going to wrap up this video, and we'll be back with you later with the next part of the lathe restoration project. Thanks for watching.